I'm telling you right now, in the first 3 months of marriage, if I had not been a Christian saying that this is for life, I would be divorced. I would not have stayed. And it was so hard in that conflict. I wanted to go home and tell my parents, I can't do this. I don't want to deal with this personality.
What you've just heard is a clip from an interview that you'll hear today. It's from a conversation with our special guest today. I'll introduce her in just a few minutes. I just wanted you to get a taste of what is to come, and I've entitled this episode as Almost Divorced After 3 Months of Marriage. But that's not all. In this episode, you'll hear how our guest handled 2 major crises in her marriage. And one of those was her 2-year-old daughter having a stroke and the impact it had on her marriage, and another to do with her own marriage itself. You don't want to miss this. And this is episode 58. So stay tuned as we get the show started.
Hello and welcome to the Happier Marriage Podcast, a podcast for spouses longing to have a happier marriage so they can feel more connected, desired and supported. Now, to start the show, here is your host and Sherpa, licensed marriage and family therapist and certified relationship coach, Kingsley Grant.
Just a reminder, the Happier Marriage Podcast is on a mission to globally eradicate unhappiness from marriages, and you're encouraged to join this movement by sharing this podcast with at least one other spouse. And just to be clear, this podcast is focused primarily on the extraordinary wife, or the wife that wants to be extraordinary, and her role in transforming her marriage one skill at a time. Now, even though it's aimed at her, I can guarantee you'll find something that will be said that will be helpful to you as well. Now, let me say this. You may or may not agree with all that you'll hear in today's episode. And quite frankly, you might be triggered by some of what you'll hear. But remember, that is one of the purpose of this show, to stir things up and then take you in what I call a safe or a solid landing. And you can always share your thoughts through a direct message, through email, and you hear more about how to do that towards the end of this show. This show is brought to you by KingsleyGrant.com. Our hope is that you'll be challenged, inspired, and encouraged in this episode as in every other episode. And at KingsleyGrant.com, you'll find resources that can help you in your marriage and in your personal journey. So again, this show is brought to you by KingsleyGrant.com. So stay tuned.
So, the big question is this. How is it possible that you have a happier marriage when you feel like you've tried everything? Your spouse isn't making an effort. You're exhausted. You feel like giving up. Or there's so much hurt that's taken place between you and your spouse. That is the question, and this podcast will give you the answers.
As stated earlier, we have a guest on the show, and her name is Sarah Nelson. You'll be hearing her story as only she can tell it. So just to remind you that you can also watch the video version of this interview on my YouTube channel, Kingsley Grant. And make sure that when you go there, you subscribe to the channel. Now, here's what you might want to know about our guest, Sarah Nelson. Sarah is an author and speaker who shares her story about the crisis she experienced with her daughter of 2 years of age, who experienced a stroke at that time, plus raising the awareness of the signs of strokes in children. That is what she's on a mission to do and speaks about. Sarah has a heart for music and has been gifted with opportunities to lead worship in different capacities since the age of 13. She has combined her passion and skill for writing to partner with organizations such as the American Family Radio and Gospel Music Association, while releasing original music and independent artists within the Christian contemporary genre. She is a wife of 22 years, the author of A Perfect Storm, Devotions During a Crisis, and most importantly, a mom of 3. Without further ado, let's welcome Sarah Nelson to the show today. Thanks for joining me on the Happier Marriage Secrets podcast, where we are on a mission to eradicate unhappiness from Christian marriages. Today we have our guest, Sarah Nelson. Sarah, I'm so glad you have taken the time to join me on this podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm so good. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Great. One of the ways, Sarah, that we will accomplish our mission is to have guests like you who share your story and our expertise to help our audience acquire, I believe, skills and learn from what is shared so that they can have happier marriages. Before we talk about what you are doing today in your life and what was the story that you have about marriages even today, I want to ask you, growing up, what was a story that you had about marriages and where did that come from?
Well, I was very fortunate because I grew up with Christian parents in a Christian home, and they are still married to this day. I believe they will be celebrating their 40-something anniversary, maybe 49th anniversary, actually. And so I had a healthy example of marriage. And I know that I'm very fortunate. I know that that is a blessing. I know that there are so many people nowadays that don't have that example. And so, I watched my parents have a Christian marriage, have a relationship founded on Christ. That doesn't mean it's always perfect. And I think the older we get, we realize, wait, they didn't have that figured out like I thought they did, or, oh, their personalities are different than my marriage now. And you kind of have to figure out how to navigate that within your own marriage, which is really so much of the topic that we're talking about today. But my husband also had parents who were married until his mother passed away in 2016. And so they had been married 47 years as well. And what I like to just bring to that is you have two people from Christian homes who are very, very fortunate to come together in marriage with two wonderful, godly examples of marriage. And we thought we had it all figured out, right? And even though both of us had a great example of the model of a Christian marriage, that didn't make marriage easy. We still had to work at it, and we still work at it. We just celebrated our 22nd anniversary.
Congratulations.
So it is a testimony to our parents when we can say we have parents that are still married and we were raised with a wonderful example of marriage. But sometimes people think that, or I thought, well, I have that example. We know what we're doing here. And there are some things that we learned that were healthy, obviously, but there were a lot of things that we had to learn for ourselves. And that still takes a lot of work. So I just want to put that out there because I don't want anyone to think like I did, oh, this is going to be easy. This is no big deal. We know what we're doing here. Because pride comes before fall, and we really have to make sure we don't set ourselves up for that.
Did you find, before I even ask this question, so as you watched your parents growing up and in that environment you described, Sarah, were there distinct roles that you recognized from both your mom and dad, and how did you tell what the roles were, if you were, as you watched their marriage?
Yes, it was a fairly traditional marriage. My father was the breadwinner. He worked, and my mom was a homemaker, and I'm the oldest of 4 girls. And so I say that to say it was a very, very equal partnership. He did what we consider the dad things, and my mom cooked and ran the household, and she did it very, very well. But they also came together as partners. They partnered in life, they partnered in parenting, and they partnered in ministry. Even before they had children, they were in ministry together. And so my mom was a very, very strong woman. I say she was a homemaker, and there were times where she worked part-time in different roles. She has a very wide skill set, and she is very, very capable. in doing many, many things. And so she brought such incredible value to the marriage through organization. She was PTA president. She was a leader within the community. She was on the school board where we lived for 13 years. So she worked in and outside the home, but she also was a leader within our home, but also within the community. And my dad supported her. He loved her. And when she was successful at something, he cheered her on. And so I say it was traditional, but it was also equal in the fact that they both had an equal amount of authority and worked together in partnership.
So your mom, she was a CEO of the home, right? You kind of become the chief executive officer. And I find it to be so many times, she knows exactly how things are. She has eyes in the side of her head, behind her, in front of her. She sees everything 360, many
That's
times. Right. Whereas many times we guys are pretty much oblivious. We're just or that's all we see, all what's ahead of us, and that's it. And very excited as well. So thank God for wives to bring that to the table for us. So you had that, your husband also had it coming in. So when you guys started dating and kind of knowing so much about the idea of of marriage, and so did you see the need for any premarital counseling or any mentorship before you start getting married? Because you know so much at this point, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Or we thought we did. Yes. Yeah. So we did go to the pastor at my home church, which was my youth pastor at the time, and he did some premarital counseling. It was not very thorough. I do think he saw two kids coming in thinking, oh, they come from good homes too. So it wasn't a very thorough vetting. We actually came in with this marriage workbook. It was this thick Christian marriage book workbook that we found, I believe, at a family bookstore at the time. And it was highly recommended. And so we went through that workbook together, and we were able to check all the boxes. Did we believe the same things? What did we believe about our view of marriage? What roles did we want to assume? We did talk about the fact that we wanted a family, what we wanted that to look like as far as work and child care and all of the things that are wrapped up into that. So we aligned in all of the major important core beliefs. And so when it made us feel real good to go and take that workbook where we were able to check all the boxes and check the same boxes and present that to our marriage counselor and to say, oh, you know what? We've got a great start. And you know what? Our parents did give us a great foundation.
Yeah.
They really did. Yeah. But I would say we had it. It was not great. And we really could have used a much more thorough and insightful counseling experience.
Mm-hmm. No, and that's really interesting that you mentioned that, because yes, I think it's one thing to see and what we, and have our own interpretation of what we think marriage, our parents are doing, because we don't have the inside behind the scene, many times information that we kind of conclude about. Like my parents growing up, I just really didn't see that interaction. I didn't see how it is that they kind of interacted. They made it work until they both, my dad died first, my mom died after, never got remarried. But they made it work, and they assumed these different roles. But I just didn't see that interaction and the conversation and how they made decisions and all those intricacies of marriage. So I was kind of handicapped coming in, because I just had to assume, okay, they probably did this. And many times my assumptions turn out to be so wrong as I got married myself, right? So I think the premarital counseling is so important, or having some mentorship to help guide. But even that, this is only prepares you for so much, because there are things that happens in our marriages as we begin to our own journey that we may not have been prepared for, ready for. And we're like, how do we now navigate this moment? So after you got married, you were pretty young at the time, right? And so you step into this whole thing. It's this honeymoon stage. It's all this wonderful, kind of Cinderella ending story awaiting you. But was that the case for you?
Well, first of all, let me just start out by, it was a wonderful day on our wedding day. We both felt such peace that this was the right decision. Our love was very, very strong, and we both just knew that this was the right decision as we had prayed over it. And some people might say, he's the love of my life. Okay, we had all the things checked on the boxes. We get to our honeymoon and we had our first huge big fight on our honeymoon. And people laugh about that. And the fight was over the fact we went to the beautiful island of Kauai. Here we are in this wonderful, exotic location. It was absolutely amazing. And we had so much fun. But this fight really was big and it was hard. And I can still feel what I felt that day because, get this, it was over the fact that not only did he take his golf clubs, and we actually went out golfing one day and I went with him, but he wanted to golf multiple times that week. And I had told him, I'm like, hey, this is a give and take. Like, I'm doing what you're doing. Now I want to go to the beach and hang out. And he didn't want to do what I wanted to do. He just wanted me to do what he wanted to do. And so that was that initial selfish motive that we dealt with right off the bat. It was, hey, not realizing that you have to come together and compromise. And we laugh about that with other couples when we have done Bible studies and facilitated leadership with other married couples. He laughs about that now and he says, what on earth was I thinking?
What were your thoughts? I'm just curious here for a second. What were your thoughts at the moment that you recognize that this is kind of going like different direction because what you're planning for, hoping for, expecting wasn't turning out, and he's wanting to do that? What were your initial thoughts about the possibility about this relationship, this marriage, and the future?
So I'm the oldest of 4 girls, which means when you have multiple children, you are forced to be flexible. There is an element of, even though I might have a lot of type A, I'm the oldest, there's still an element of flexibility that you are just taught in the home. He was the youngest of 2 children and got his way a lot. And I immediately noticed, oh, wait, this is going to be an issue. And not that I didn't have issues as well, because I had a plan and I didn't want to deviate from that plan of what I wanted to do. And my feet were firmly planted in my way of how I wanted things to go. And so you had 2 very strong wills coming at each other, which we continue to work on to this day. But that is how I saw it. And I did recognize it. And I thought, this feels really hard.
So you had to wrestle through that very moment, and not even to realize that possibly that was also preparing you for something else in your relationship, in your marriage, the other times that you're going to have to wrestle with and navigate together with your personality differences and coming together around those issues. So you have 3 children, right? And you've been married for 20 plus years now, right? 22 years. Again, congratulations on that, because that's really, in our day today, it's amazing. So,
it's a lot of work.
Yeah. So along the way, you encountered as a couple some things that you never planned for, right? And what was that, and how did you guys kind of navigate that moment?
Well, there are 2 things that come to mind. And the first thing is, within the first 3 months of marriage, I realized our personalities were not like my parents. Our personalities created their own dynamic. And we were 3 months in, and when I presented maybe something that I had a hard time with, or when I went to him with my emotions, I wasn't getting the reaction that I needed or wanted. And it was a reaction that I was not used to. It was an emotional reaction, and it was escalated. And I did not ever see that with my parents. I'm not saying I never saw it with my parents, but personality was very different from my dad's personality. And it caused conflict in a way where, I will tell you this, we were both Christians. We both came from Christian homes. Here I thought we had this strong love that my friends would tell me, oh, we love your relationship. It's such a great example. Let me just tell you, we had all those things, but I'm telling you right now, in the first 3 months of marriage, if I had not been a Christian saying that this is for life, I would be divorced. I would not have stayed. And it was so hard in that conflict. I wanted to go home and tell my parents, I can't do this. I don't want to deal with this personality. And he's a wonderful, wonderful man. And he would say the same thing about me. He has. And he said, yeah, he goes, I don't think we would be married. And we love each other so much. And I think that that's a testament to people out there when they're dealing with problems. I just want people to know sometimes it can feel so difficult, like you can't get through it. And sometimes it just takes that commitment to know we have to work through this because that's what God calls us to do.
Yeah. So you guys were committed to the process of whatever comes in the main of some vows. But like you said, had you not had that anchor that that was put in place when it comes to your relationship with God and what He has, you're committed to Him and His ways, that was what preserved and kept you guys going through and be able to survive that moment. So really, sometimes what I find, people just don't have those kind of, and not to say that there's anything negative, bad or wrong, right or wrong, or bad or good about the situation. Just what it is. They just don't have sometimes a deep anchor in something that allows them to navigate those moments. And I find that that's the only place I know is really God, because you have to have something beyond you, something that's supernatural and more powerful. And you guys were able to access that at that time, either on your own or together, or even sometimes not even realizing that God was working when you're probably like, I just feel like giving up, but God stepped in and helped you through. So that was one of those things that how you navigated that well. And was that pretty much it set you now in place for the future, as in, okay, now we understand our personalities and now we get it all figured out and nothing else along the way. So you were all set from that point on, right?
Well, what we realized was we needed community. And so what we put in place was the beginning of how we work on our marriage. And the first step we took is that we got involved in our church in a young married class. And in that young married class, they talked about scripture, they talked about marriage, they talked about Bible studies that we would work on together as a class and as a couple to bring accountability and to bring growth into our relationship. And what I realized is we have to live in community, because when we look around, we realize that, oh, wait, every couple is dealing with the same issues. Every couple is dealing with finances. Every couple is dealing with in-laws. Every couple is dealing with sex. It's all the same.
Yeah.
And there are times where people are dealing with very, very heavy issues. But marriage, people are dealing with the same things. And it lightened our load. It made me feel like, oh, wait, we're not abnormal. This isn't as big of a deal as I thought it was. Mm-hmm. And it allowed me to have perspective. And so, for years, and we continue to work on those things. We've never arrived. We are always working and getting better. And I think once you realize it is a work in progress, and it will always be a work in progress, it lightens your load to think, okay, I can breathe, we can move forward, and we can enjoy the good moments as well. But I'll tell you, the work that we put in prepared us for the crisis that we faced. And that was the second point and example that I was thinking to you. At 10 years or 12 years into our marriage, we had 3 children. Our youngest daughter was 2, and we suffered a life-threatening crisis with her that in some ways changed the trajectory of our family. And the normal life we had been living, that rug of normality had been pulled out from underneath us. And it was the work that we had put in. It was the anchor that we had started out with, but it was the work that we built over time that prepared us for that crisis.
So, it's interesting though, as I kind of begin to unpack this piece here, Sarah, that sometimes we don't realize how the dots are connected and how God will use all things for His good. And sometimes if we can only stay steady and continue to prod moving forward, this idea of keep on working, keep on moving your feet one step at a time, and this will pass kind of thing, and trust in sovereignty. I think it makes it very, it's difficult if we don't have that as a backdrop to our lives. But you guys right now begin to work on things, work on your personality, having some tests along the way, working through those, getting through the grade on that and checking your grade and see how you graded and go back to work and make it better next time to prepare for this moment, because God knew this was going to come. And he knew what you needed and your husband needed for this moment of crisis. So the crisis hit. What happened? Then what happened?
Well, a crisis hit, and my daughter, who was 2, suffered an ischemic stroke on the left side of her brain with no pre-existing conditions. We were on a ski trip, our first ski trip of our family of 5 in Park City, Utah. So we were 1,000 miles away from home. We live in Texas. And so we found ourselves in this hospital, and we found that our life might look completely different. And so we came together as partners. And I will tell you that in this particular crisis, we just automatically broke into our roles where we partnered well. And I really have to say that I contribute that to the work that we put in those 12 years leading up to that. Mark trusted that I would care for her and stay in the hospital with her and process all of the information from the doctors that we needed in order to focus on how to care for our 2-year-old daughter that was now completely paralyzed on the right side of her body and who had lost her ability to speak. That's a heavy load. But we also had a 5 and a 7-year-old at the time. And so he made sure to go back to the ski lodge with our family, extended family. He helped manage to get our son Seth and our daughter Hannah to where they needed to be. He wanted them to be able to stay in ski school. He wanted them to be able to have a fun vacation without rocking their life and to keep their mind and emotions stable. And so that was his job. He took care of them. He would drive back and forth from the ski lodge to the hospital. And then his job, once he was at the hospital, was to care for me, because he knew I was caring for our daughter. And yes, he wanted to make sure she was taken care of, but I was on point as a mother, as an advocate at that point. And so I remember the first time he left and came back was probably about 36 hours into this crisis. And he looked at me. I still had on the same clothes that I had when we got to the hospital. I don't think I had eaten anything. I don't even think I had had a cup of coffee. My daughter, after she woke up from her MRI, got sick all over my ski clothes. I hadn't paid any attention to it because my job was to focus on her. And he looked at me and he said, okay, now she's asleep. She's comfortable. He said, it's time for you to get something to eat. And I said, I can't do it. He said, I really need you to get something to eat. So he was looking after me. And I was looking after our daughter, and he was making sure our family was stable in ways that could support me in doing my job to be the point person for the medical issues that we were facing.
Well, it's really, I appreciate you taking the time to share that, Sarah. Thank you, because I think what you just kind of outlined sometimes how in moments like that, the need to step into different roles, even sometimes crossing over if we need to, depending on how each person define their roles in the marriage, and realize it's a team. We're now in clutch time. We're in crisis mode. We've got to find a way to make sure our team still move forward to the end zone, whatever that might look like. And so I'm hearing your husband took on a role like, okay, I'm going to hold things steady and try to calmly present on the other side. But also what he did also was come back and make certain that you took care of yourself or advocated for your own well-being, which is another way of investing into and showing, I think, whatever you may have thought about him, I'm sure you had good thoughts and stuff, that only reinforced how incredible of a person you had by your side. Sometimes these crises can do the reverse. It can truly become a blame game and a finger pointing and create tension, and the relationship can go the other way. But it sounds like this kind of pulled things together more so than anything else. Am I correct?
In this particular crisis, yes, it did. And we had to assume our roles because it was that big. We had to take this on. And then my daughter stayed in the hospital. And then she was in a rehabilitation hospital for a month. And he stayed home and held down the home front, his job, my business, our children, while I stayed with our daughter and handled all the medical issues. I handled the therapy. I handled the information. And to this day, I still handle all of the medical for our family. I have all the appointments. I have all of the information. And he defers to me when it comes to that because that is the area of expertise or one of the areas of expertise. But in this particular crisis, that has been my job.
Mm.
And
can I add something I want to add? Because I hear more often than not, Sarah, when people find that, for example, you're doing all the medical, you're holding down this part. Sometimes I find that one spouse may say, why do I have to do all of this? Why is it that it all lands on my lap? Even though they're very capable, they have the skill set, but sometimes they will say, yeah, but I'm tired. I mean, I just want to have somebody take over some of these roles. Like, for example, one spouse may say, why do I have to always plan our vacation? Why do I have to always look for this, so there's always idea because they constantly, and they're better at it, but somehow they get to a point where they feel like, okay, I don't want to be doing this anymore. But you took on that role. You mentioned about your skill set and you continue to do that. Does that ever cross your mind?
no, because I like having control of it. And it's not a control issue. It's just that I'm dealing with my child and her well-being. And as a mother, I have a mother's gut and a mother's intuition, which is a gift from God. And there have been things that because I was in the hospital with her from the beginning and through the process, now she's almost 12. There are things over the years that I have seen and I have picked up on that he is a very nurturing, wonderful father. But and fathers are wonderful caregivers too. But there are things that I picked up on as a mom that dads may not pick up on as quickly, or things that I see in my intuition that I've said, we've got to tackle this. And I've had the space in our relationship. I have had jobs. I have had businesses, but I've also worked mostly part-time and he is the breadwinner. So it gives me the time to focus on it. And it's a full-time job when you're handling something like that. So for me to pass along information to him, is he capable? Yes. Have I filed it away so that if something were to happen to me, he would know where to go to and how to access it? Yes, he is more than capable. But right now, it's so much information. It's just better for me to do it. And it's easier. And I want to know, and I have all the history to understand it. So that's kind of where I come in on that. I will tell you, there have been other crises, and I say crisis, difficult times, where we have played the blame game. There have been, and that's been since then, since we've been through a crisis. That was 10 years ago. Since then, we've had a lot of other stressful situations. And maybe those situations haven't gone as smoothly, and maybe we had to put more work into it, or maybe I said, we need counseling. We needed a third party to come in and mediate to say, okay, there's something here that in our relationship that needs to be fixed. Yeah. And it's very important that we fix it. So there have been other things that we have faced that have put us in a situation where we have faced pressure and that have created conflict, that we have done what you mentioned, and it hasn't been as smooth of a ride. So I do want to point that out because that does happen. But in the crisis with my daughter, it was really nice to see and experience a supernatural kind of way that we were able to assume those roles. And again, I just want to say it was because of the work and the anchor that we had placed in our lives beforehand.
I appreciate taking the time to even mention that, Sarah, and even pointing out the fact that there are times when you do feel the stress and the tension that other couples do feel that brings a tear, sometimes feel like a tear in the relationship, or at least a wedge of some kind, and you got to push towards that. Something you also mentioned, which I very much strongly believe, is that, I think women have that uncanny, that instinct, right? And I want to say just, cut to the chase, you guys are much better at it than a whole lot better than we are. We just don't have that inbuilt, and that's okay. They think they're good or bad. It's how God designed us. I mean, that's why we need both persons to complete and make that one work. And so why a woman is needed and a man is needed together to make that relationship what it's supposed to be. So I want to, say that, yeah, it's important to realize that women have that ability, I believe, that God has gifted them with, to know how things work and how should operate within the family. So you're at a place right now that all has happened. You've also did a devotional. So from this crisis, right, God has used you to take that and turn into something to help people. Tell us a little bit about how that has come about and what you're doing today with that. What crisis you experienced in your life?
Yeah, so I did publish a devotional, and it is the story and testament of what happened in our lives, but is a testimony of how God revealed himself, and it is a 28-day devotional. The personal story is the backdrop where you have scripture and lessons that God breathed into the situation, and he ministered to us through those scriptures. And so each devotional uses one of those scriptures in a lesson. So anyone reading it can apply it to their life, especially if they're going through a difficult time. But that came about, it took me 7 years to publish from the time my daughter had a crisis, and then I released it in 2021. So 7 years is a long time because we were processing the crisis. We had to process the aftermath, and I had to go through the journey to get to a place where the Lord said, I want you to write. That process actually began in the hospital. I began to share how God was working, and it evolved over time. And then I began to see the fruit of how he was using our testimony to minister to others. And there's a beautiful testimony of a friend of mine who's a featured guest in this devotional, and how she shares how the Lord used our story to minister to her in a time where she lost her child. And it was a beautiful display of God's compassion on the brokenhearted. But as we were processing all of this and going through the journey of getting back to what we found as a new normal, as my daughter progressed and did well and recovered well, it was about a year after, actually it was exactly a year after she had a stroke. And I really began to feel like God was saying, I want you to write it down, but I didn't really have a plan, and I had been chewing on it. And I tell in the book of how on Valentine's Day, 2015, I sat my husband down at a little Italian restaurant in our hometown of Waco, Texas, and I just poured out my thoughts and my heart about what I was feeling from the Lord. And he spoke into the book, and he said, oh yeah, he said, it sounds like it needs to be a devotional, which I had been feeling, but he didn't know. And I had been praying for a confirmation. And then God gave me one through Mark and through the marriage and through our relationship. And he used Mark to encourage me and to kind of set my feet on this path to move forward. And from there, I was able to finally, after 7 years, get it to the place where it came together. But it's been interesting how the marriage has been a part of the foundation of this book.
I just really sit back and just think about how wise God is and how he chooses a vessel that he can trust with something like this, and use it through you for someone else as well, and how you are willing to become that vessel. So I really thank God that you're obedient, and for a husband also to come alongside and confirm is what I believe God wants for your life. Sarah, we're kind of coming down to the end of our time, but one of the things in this podcast would like to challenge our spouses to do is take responsibility for their own happiness, their own happiness in their marriage. So what are some things that they can do to ensure, you may have done, that the reliance for their happiness is not placed on their spouse primarily?
I really love that, because I think when people come together in marriage, they come together in marriage with the expectation that this person is going to fulfill me. Mm-hmm. This person is going to give me what I need. This person is going to make me happy. And what I've learned is you have to go into marriage as a whole person, being ready to give, and with the idea that this is a selfless act of how we support and love one another, how we choose to be not reactive, but responsive to the other person in a way where we treat that person the way we want to be treated. And instead of having an inward focus, we have to have an outward focus. And big I am a whole person. But how do we get to the place of being a whole person? Because we're all a work in progress. And it does come to a relationship with the Lord, seeking His will in our lives, being in prayer, being in Scripture, and understanding who we are in Christ first before we enter marriage. And if you're to a place where, and just let me just say this, I feel like we did that and we still had difficulty. It was still hard, and it is hard. It's not meant to be easy because it is a selfless union, and it's made to be selfless. None of us are selfless. We have to really work at being selfless towards one another and meeting each other's needs and giving to the other person. It's iron sharpened iron, and it's not an easy process. And so I just want to encourage those who are listening, if you haven't done that, you can start now. It is never too late, but you cannot rely on the other person to make you happy. You have to fulfill that in your own spiritual journey first and foremost. And you have to come to the table thinking, how can my heart change towards this person? What can I do to be more understanding? Where was I in the wrong in that conversation? And if I don't think I was wrong in that conversation, help me to respond in a way that brings understanding to the other person. And it's this constant process of saying to the Lord, Lord, take what's in my heart and help me to be better at this. Help me to be right before you so that I can be right before my husband or right before my spouse, husband or wife. And so one of the things, though, when we talk about crisis that I think is really important in the aftermath in marriage, I don't want to paint too rosy of a picture because even though I felt like we handled that in a partnership together well with our daughter, there are still glitches and there's still things you have to work through. And so if someone is going through crisis, I just want to point out that, men and women process crisis differently. And we have to be understanding of that and respectful to our differences. My husband is just very matter of fact. He doesn't dwell on the past. He processes it, he deals with it, and he moves on. We as women are way more emotionally connected to all of the things that we experience, and especially when it comes to our children. And so we had to give each other the space to process crisis in the way that was healthy for each of us. And that looks different. And even my friend Shelley, who is a featured guest in this devotional, said to me one time, they lost a baby. They lost a child. And she even spoke into that of how they process that grief differently. And we have to be respectful of each other's differences, give each other the space, and pray in a way to say, Lord, help me to be understanding, to give them the space that they need to process what we've gone through, what we're going through, and what we will continue to go through.
Wow. Let me just say, as you're listening, I want you to rewind and go right back to when Sarah began to share about crisis and how it looks different sometimes on the other side. Because I think she deposited some nuggets that I think is so important that you want to go back and just parse through and listen and pause if you need to, and just meditate and reflect on what she just said, because she really unpacked, I believe, the equation that really helps you to navigate crisis. I want to thank you for taking that time, Sarah, to touch on some very important topics just now that I believe summarize basically that relationship. And you talk about how it's not easy. And you're right. I tell people many times, the only place we find easy before that comes before hard is in the dictionary. Outside of that, hard is what life does. It's hard comes first, and then it becomes easy afterwards. You always start off anything you're going to go after. It first requires hard, if it's of importance, and easy comes afterwards. So yes, that's what marriage is and should look like. Sarah, someone is listening today, is like so drawn to all you're saying, and they're looking for, yes, we're going to have the link to where they can find the devotional, and they want to know more about you and what is it that possibly they could, I'm sure, if they reach out to you and stuff. Where would they do that, and what could they expect if they did?
They can go to my website. It is sarah.nelsonblog.com, and they can reach me, email me, get on my social media, message me through social media. I love to hear people's stories and connect with those who are listening. I like to hear what people are going through, and I do like to respond to those who are seeking help, seeking advice, or just wanting to say, hey, you know what, I went through the same thing and I relate to what you're saying. And I love to hear, from others on that. They can also go to Amazon. There's also a link on the website to purchase the devotional, but they can go to Amazon. The devotional is A Perfect Storm, Devotions During a Crisis. And they can also see areas where I speak, and I do have places where I will be speaking this next year. And it's just fun. I love the community of people who listen.
Awesome. And I have all the links, of course, mentioned. You mentioned sarah.nelsonblog.com. We have the links to the book and Amazon, and also it's on your website as well. But I want to encourage you, as you're listening today, you only have just, pull back a brief part of the curtain and let us in. I'm sure there's a lot more there. So I want to encourage you to connect with Sarah, go to her website, and also, share some story with her, because she would be a great resource for you, or connect you with other resources as well. Sarah, is there any one last thing? I know you said so much today. I mean, especially the last piece you just shared was so, I think God ordained. It was just so powerful. I believe that was a divine moment. So I wanted that's really, if that's all you want to share, that's fine. That's really captured everything. But as we kind of wind up, wrapping up things here, any last piece of advice for our audience, and that you want to lead them with, and then we wrap things up afterwards?
The one thing I would tell them is, if you are going through a hard time in your marriage, seek help. Don't try to do it alone. Find a healthy Christian community. Reach out to a church. Reach out to someone that you trust, someone that can pray with you. Prayer is powerful, and community is powerful. God intends for us to do this with other people. And like I said before, when I was this young newlywed, I was thinking this isn't going to work. And it was our small community of Christians that made me realize, oh, wait, they're dealing with these issues too. And we could laugh about it and bring perspective to it, and bring humor to such stereotypical issues. But I will say, if you are in an abusive situation, if you are dealing with things that are much heavier today than we've talked about, seek help. That is not what God intends. And there will be people out there that we can reach out to.
Amen. Sarah, wow, this was so rich, and I could go on and on. There's so many things, and but I tell you that you kind of brought into the episode, to the podcast, what I think was needed. And we prayed about, and God kind of He answered what a person on the other side is listening to right now, because that's what they needed to hear. So thank you so very much for taking the time out of your schedule to be here to record this episode with us today. And I'll make sure I have all the links there in the episode. So thank you again for being here. And we're going to wrap things up here. So as you're listening today, make sure you connect with Sarah, and also the links will be in the show notes. But also go back to that part I described earlier and just replay that. Listen, and just listen, pause. She said some very important things I don't want you to miss. And so that, I believe, what God wanted to hear today. So thank you, Sarah, for being here. That said, to my community, at the Happier Life community, we'll talk to you very, very soon. God bless. And there you have it, my friends. I hope you got a lot from this episode. I know I did. Make sure you connect with Sarah and her website at sarah.nelsonblog.com, sarah.nelsonblog.com. The links will be provided in the show notes that follows this episode. If you found value in this episode, make sure you have you leave a rating and a review to help this show get more visibility. And if you haven't taken the Happier Marriage quiz as for your relationship, I want you to make sure you do. It's a good way to assess the state of your marriage and get some feedback. And if this interests you, you can access the quiz at happiermarriagesecrets.com/quiz. happiermarriagesecrets.com/quiz. So thanks again for listening. And here's the announcer.
We've come to the end of another exciting show. And if you enjoyed this podcast, 1, make sure you give this show a rating and review. 2, subscribe to the show to get all new releases. And 3, get your complimentary copy of the 5 Secrets to a Happier Marriage ebook at kingsleygrant.com/HMS ebook. Again, it's kingsleygrant.com/HMS ebook. See the link in the show notes. Do it today. Don't delay. Thanks so much for listening, and make sure you tell one other spouse about this show, or better yet, share it with them. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. May he turn his face toward you and give you his peace, both now and forever.